All right. Let's get fired up here.
Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Well, hello and welcome to the actual Anarchy podcast, the podcast where we talk about movies from a Rothbardian Anarcho-Capitalist perspective. And tonight, as I'm wearing the Godfather of Anarcho-Capitalism's t-shirt, we're going to be talking about The Godfather on this 197th episode of the show tonight. Ostensibly, it's about Godfather Part 2, but all three of us, Robert, my co-host, and our guest, Keith Knight of Don't Tread on Anyone, we've all watched at least the first movie and the second movie, and Robert even watched the third. So we might have a hodgepodge of godfatherliness, mobster stuff to talk about tonight on this episode. You can find show us more at actualanarchy.com/197. And let's go to check in with Robert and see how things are going with you over there on the east side.
Oh, what's up, Daniel? Thank you. Yeah, no, things are going pretty well. We actually got a new hire at the store, at the restaurant, and it was fun. She came in to interview at 10 o'clock, and I hired her on the spot, and she put in a full day's work, and she turned out great. And it's I don't know what it is about this lady, but she's like 19 or something, and she's apologizes for everything and thanks you for everything. She's like the most polite human being I've ever met, and it's really kind of disarming. I don't know how to handle that. I want to just be myself, but then I find myself like being a little more polite around her. It's kind of infectious. I don't know. I think she was raised pretty well. Right after I hired her, her mom came up and thanked me. So I think that's definitely where she gets it from. But yeah, it was kind of strange, kind of an interesting experience.
Yeah, I think you better keep an eye on her. Those are the ones you kind of got to worry about. It sounds like she might have been homeschooled, would be my guess. And not that that's a bad thing. That's what we intend to do with our kids. But it definitely sounds like she was raised right.
Well, she's from, I guess, around here, but she spent the past few years in Texas along the Mexico-Texan border. And apparently she's happy to be out of there because there was quite a bit of the violence and the drug running going across in that area. So, yeah, they kind of fled that area and came to my area, which, I mean, there's still drugs, but I don't think there's as much violence around it. But anyway, yeah, it's good.
All right, very good. And we have a very good guest, so let's introduce him on the last hour's portion of the show, shall we?
Okay.
All right, fair enough. Make you an offer we can't refuse, right?
That's a...
Hey everyone, it's Daniel Elwood and Robert Paul Johnson. We are the Last Nighters. You can find us on the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. You can also find this at lastnighters.com/140. We're going to be talking about The Godfather tonight. Probably Godfather Part 2, because it's kind of, it makes the trilogy sort of work all unto itself between The Godfather 1 and Godfather Part 2. So we're going to be talking about the story of succession and a metaphor for capitalism, where the distinction between the mafia and the government becomes blurred. We have the great Keith Knight of Don't Tread on Anyone, who's joined us for a movie review that we cannot refuse to do. Welcome back to the show, Keith. You were our guest a while back, and we will have that on our show notes page at lastnighters.com/140. But why don't you introduce yourself and tell our audience what you do and where they can find what you do?
Thank you, gentlemen, for having me back. My name is Keith. I run the Keith and I Don't Tread on Anyone channel. The places you can find my work are on minds.com, youtube.com, archive.org, BitChute, and library.tv. I basically run a show where I try to upload videos either that I do personally or interviews that I have. And I attempt to make the case for anarcho-capitalism, a private property, natural law, voluntary society, going through many different from many different angles in hopes of appealing to the average statist. So I really try to go through the principles from a number of different angles. I got about 500 videos. Everything's free. I don't have any ads on my stuff. Please check it out. It's Keith and I Don't Tread on Anyone.
All right, and we will definitely have a link to that on our show notes page at lastnighters.com/140. And just as an aside, just as a teaser for our listeners, if you don't already know Keith's work, it's abundant, like he was saying, 500 episodes, and it's very extensive and intensive. And it's one of those things to where you can't go through one of his videos and find much to argue with or fault. So I really appreciate what you do. I know that you're heavily influenced by the likes of Larkin Rose and Dave Smith and folks like that. And I'm a big fan of those folks as well. And there is another thing you do, and you did recently, where it's Ask Me Anything, where you actually go on to hostile adversarial platforms and discuss. You'll take any question, you field them very, very well. So I'll post the most recent one also on the show notes page because it's a really good listen.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, that is the goal. I am, I love when, of course, fellow libertarians subscribe and share the stuff, especially, but it really is a show for your average statist to hopefully come across one or two episodes. So every time I have a show, I will, go through things that every libertarian knows, which might be a little boring, but the goal is to attract and change popular opinion for everyone in the world. So that's why AMAs, I think, are so valuable.
Right. And to tout our little horn here, we think that's what we kind of do here with talking about these things from a movie perspective, because that way you can get just average, whoever who's interested in a conversation and a review about a particular movie. It might be a favorite of theirs. And we, of course, inject some of our some of our philosophy and leanings into it.
Absolutely. You guys do a terrific job.
Oh, thank you. I'm not sure how to accept an actual compliment. Robert, do you have any comments to make before we get into the Google description?
Well, I'm just a big fan of Keith. I don't know if, Keith, you're going to be working with our friend Patrick anymore. Do you have any plans for that?
You know what? I talked to him recently, and we're hopefully going to get something back together. Patrick actually had a child, so he is focusing on family life, reproducing ANCAPs at hopefully a very fast rate.
Yes,
so I definitely support him. He has such a terrific archive of shows to watch, so his fans, I'm sure, still have plenty to keep him busy in the meantime.
It's true, but I did really enjoy your podcast series where you guys would get together and kind of tear through some fallacious arguments. I particularly remember the one where you guys took on Ayn Rand and her complaints about anarchy. So that was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, you know that when you can really attack the best, that's when you can fight against Floyd Mayweather and Mike Tyson. That's when you probably have the right competing philosophy in the world of ideas. So yeah, taking on Rand's criticisms of anarchism and Milton Friedman, I think those are two of the best things that we could do to really let people know that we have the foundation for true and moral society.
Right. And of course, we're talking about Pat McFarland of Liberty Weekly. You can find his stuff at libertyweekly.net. Everyone, we'll have a link to that. We've done a bunch of shows with him. We've been on his show a few times. Keith, we've been on your show, so I'll also post that on there. And I have that appearance and many of my other appearances, and Robert, on danielelwood.com. You can click on guest appearances. You can also find links to some of the other projects that we're work on over here on our side of the table. So anyway, let's get into the El Google description, which will be for Godfather Part 2. So Godfather Part 2 says it came out, let's see here, December 20th, 1974. 9.10, 9 out of 10 on IMDb, 98% Rotten Tomatoes, 90% Metacritic, and 93% of Google users like it. It says, the compelling sequel to The Godfather, contrasting the life of the Corleone father and son, traces the problems of Michael Corleone, played by Al Pacino, in 1958, and that of a young immigrant, Vito Corleone, Corleone, played by Robert De Niro in 1917's Hell's Kitchen. Michael survives many misfortunes, and Vito is introduced to a life of crime. The director, of course, is Francis Ford Coppola. This is based on novels by Mario Puzo. The box office at the time was $48 to $88 million. Apparently, they're guessing on that, but it did win many Academy Awards, Best Picture, among others. And some would argue that this is Al Pacino's peak performance. And I can definitely see why in watching this. He definitely has an intensity and a gravitas to him that he, I think, leans on very heavily later on in his career. But then he embellishes it a lot with a lot of shouting and being loud. So anyway, Robert, I will go to you for your opening salvo, please.
Well, as a long-time aficionado for all things Cosa Nostra and mafia, organized crime at all, I mean, from the movies like Goodfellas and Casino and Johnny Brasco, all kinds of films. I mean, it's just it's a rich style of film to make. Like, there's so much history and crime. It just fascinates, the average human being, I would think. People driven to extremes to who don't seem to have that moral aspect to their nature, where they are going to protect their families at the same time they're creating all these enemies for their families. So that's the kind of contradiction in Michael Corleone's character, and just the contradiction of all these mafia type people. Like, in reality, they're just kind of like these thugs that want to rob people and not actually have to do like honest work. Although Corleone does want to move the family in the honest world's direction. But ultimately, he's a guy who chooses to use violence to get what he wants. And, of course, I'm an ANCAP. I don't think that selling drugs is necessarily the greatest thing, but it's certainly, if you're selling it to, a willing buyer who's an adult and can decide for themselves if they want that. Prostitution, all the gambling, certainly no such thing as a crime. It's called gambling. But, you have these artificial crimes created by the government and then, just because you make something illegal doesn't mean it goes away. All it does is turn it into this black market. And then you have these opportunists who don't have the ability to use the police. You can't just like call somebody, hey, you can't call 911 when you're a mafia guy who's getting robbed by another mafia guy. You pull out your gun and you deal with a situation like that. So there is this fascination for me, especially, of these people who go into these worlds, who are okay with using violence. And then, of course, the women that love these men, right? They're the women that are like, well, I don't care where the money comes from. You especially see that in movies like Goodfellas, where you have all these women around these main characters that are just reaping the rewards of going out with these guys or marrying these guys. And they're like, well, I'm having this great life, and it doesn't matter how much blood is required for it. Then there's series like The Sopranos, where you get to really dive into these characters, and you got Carmela, who's kind of okay with it, but then she has problems with it. In this film, Kay is the big kind of moral compass character. She's initially in there with Michael, thinking that he's a good guy and he doesn't want to be a part of this. But then she keeps getting reminded that, oh, okay, well, Michael actually is a part of this. Oh, he's the guy. And, eventually he's like the guy that she hates. And it's a fascinating world. And these movies are classics. Now, I'm going to have some criticism. Like you mentioned Pacino's performance. And I agree. It's a very powerful kind of performance. He's a very, brooding, forceful guy. He's the head of this crime family, and he can't show weakness. He has to show extreme competence at all time. He's like a CEO, essentially, right, of a company. But in terms of an audience watching a character, he doesn't really give me a lot to go on in terms of his interior monologue, how I'm feeling. So I don't really have a chance to connect with him like I did in the first movie. In the first movie, he's like this idealistic kid, and then he kind of just gets sucked into this world where he has to kind of take over for his dad. But in this movie, he is the Don, and he is the head of this powerful organization, and he's scheming and he's manipulating people, and you don't know who he's telling the truth to. And he doesn't really let the audience into his mindset or his world. And for me as an audience member, I'm like, I can't really get on board with this main character in terms of somebody I really care about and think and feel for. So it kind of removed me from the movie in that sense. It's still fascinating, still really well done. But in terms of my emotional investment in the film, like I thought the most important, most powerful moments were at the end when Kay's like, I'm out of here. That was like, man, I totally feel you. I wouldn't want to be around the psychopath, and I wouldn't want to be in this world of violence and whatever. Like, obviously he cares about you, but at the same time, he just really loves this power that he's throwing around and killing people. And, well, I only want to kill my enemies, Kay. Well, you have a never-ending supply of enemies, like any government. The enemies are just created. I mean, where you go and kill somebody, and yeah, he's going to have a bunch of people that were his friends and relatives, and now you got a whole new pack of enemies. And it's just this never-ending justification for war, right? I mean, that's the U.S. government in any war ever. Oh, we got all these enemies we got to fight. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a big, long, rambling introduction. Sorry about all that. I don't know what you want to respond to, but that's my intro.
Man, yeah, there's a lot to like kind of try to take apart and address, and there's just so much content in these movies. And we're trying to talk about Godfather Part 2, but it's really hard to do that without making reference to Godfather, the original, because that's really where you see the transformation, like you were saying with Pacino. Like Godfather 2, he is at that peak of his mobster power. And we're sort of seeing in Godfather 2, like there's the dual stories. There's the ascension of Vito and the descending from that peak of Michael, where he starts to lose a lot of his, what he holds true and valuable to him, like family being very important. He's actually losing his family as he tries to do these, these big one last score kind of things. He doesn't actually call them one last scores, and you're right, there's not a whole lot of like understanding what his inner monologue is. But he's trying to do this deal with Hyman Roth, which got really confusing because he's got his, one of his capo guys, I forget his name, who he goes to his house.
Vincenzi or something, I think his name is.
Yeah, and he's like, yeah, they tried to, take out my family, but he's sort of like blaming, he's talking to the two different parties, and he's blaming the other party in both cases. And as an audience member, I got really confused. Is like, okay, who does he actually think did this? Because is it this bumbling guy who's actually working with him, or is it this Hyman Roth guy who's like very nice to his face and had a great relationship with Vito, and so he has every reason to trust him? And I don't understand what Hyman Roth gets out of the deal, because it gets a little convoluted, because Hyman Roth is an old guy. He's sick. He's not going to last, more than 10 more years, probably. and it seems to be just a matter of like trying to get him out of the way a little bit sooner. I don't really know.
Yeah, I found the whole plot to be fairly obtuse. Since we don't get Michael's interior monologue, I don't know who he's lying to and who he tells the truth to. So I was like, what's really happening? And it was kind of fascinating in that sense. But then at the same time, I felt removed from that as an audience member.
Right. And then you addressed Kay, and then Keith will bring you in. I felt that Kay was like one of the most boring characters to me, and even in Godfather 1, in that she's just kind of naive and just keeps getting told, oh, I'm going to change, or, just 5 years, then we'll get out and whatever. But then she does what she knows will hurt him the most, because part of his makeup, Michael's makeup, is the Catholic faith and family being most important. So when she aborts the baby, and everyone tells Michael that it was a miscarriage to try to cover for it or make it more palatable, because it's still, devastating either way. But then she says to him, no, this was an abortion because I don't want to raise your child. I don't want to have your child anymore. That is like the worst thing. She knew that was the weakness for him. That was the thing she could do to hurt him the most. And I felt like his response, other than hitting her, not okay with that, just for the record, everyone. But his response of like being outraged by that and disassociating himself from her, like basically excommunicating her or social distancing from her, or what social distancing,
Ostracizing her. He ostracized her from the family.
Right. And I felt that was probably an appropriate response. She still had access to the kids, and it's sort of like the reverse of how it normally happens, like via the courts, where it's usually, as we talked about in Miss Doubtfire, it's usually the women who have the majority of the custody, etc. So he was sort of like a government unto himself, imposing this reversal of the traditional, arrangement in those scenarios. And there's other likenesses to the mafia and governments and being, almost interchangeable. Even early on in the movie, when we have Senator Geary, who's coming there to glad hand and make an appearance for money or whatever. And then he starts strong-arming Michael for this casino license. And you can just see, that they're both in the same racket. And Corleone actually says it to him, hey, we're roughly in the same business here. And to just see that highlighted, it seemed like Coppola and Puzo might have had a bit of I don't know, leanings that you and I might agree with, so to speak.
Yeah, I would say so, especially at the end in the first film, where Kay's like, your father, he has men killed, Michael. And he's like, now who's being naive, Kay? Senators don't do that. Whatever.
Right, exactly. So Keith, I know we've already talked for like 20 minutes, but what's your take on just the movie in general, and then anything that we've brought up so far, and then take us wherever you want to go from there?
It was funny watching the end of part one, just because it has been a while since I've watched it beginning to end, and to see that the average person might say something like, oh, senators and presidents, that they're the legitimate realm of violence in society, or it's not really violence when they do it. It's attempting to move us towards a progressive social order or something to that extent, when in reality, in 1953, we have the CIA releasing a document, or there was an internal document called A Study in Assassination, where Harry Truman, is going over who they should assassinate in Guatemala. You have Eisenhower talking about assassinating Patrice Lumumba in the Congo going back to 1961. So we have a long series of senators and presidents having documented assassinations. Gaddafi must go. Assad needs to go. Just invading to overthrow Saddam. So of course, it is interesting to see the naivete with which people bring to the state, but the ultimate skepticism they have for private enterprise or anyone. Oh, everyone in the predatory private sector is trying to screw me, but the politicians are there to serve me. This is the ultimate intentions versus results, which we definitely see with Michael, saying, but what I want to do is protect my family, sort of like the Walter White thing. I'm doing this for my family, he says, so I just want some money, but he gets so caught up in it, he ends up doing it for himself. This is the same thing that you see, and you have to be able to say, all right, your goal is protection. There was just an assassination attempt where they shot into the house indiscriminately. You're not doing a good job of this. We should also apply this to the state. So when we say, well, government's there to keep us safe. So when they don't keep us safe, then the social contract is invalidated. Then government goes to jail when they don't hold up their end of the social contract. Of course not. So having this ability to hold people to their word and being able to falsify their claims. You want to keep the family safe? All right. You're putting the family in more jeopardy than 99.9% of families that exist. So you're doing this for you and you're doing this for the money. At least recognize that, and then maybe we could work around it. So the inability for people to think logically or critically with regards to the mafia might be, but I could definitely see being there, but it's nothing compared to how they treat the state. As far as, the existence of the mafia, of course, government's the number one cause of mafias, outlawing things for the same way there's no Al Capone being violent with alcohol today. We don't see many drive-bys between competing alcohol companies. We wouldn't have any of the mafia violence or the gang violence if drugs, prostitution, gambling were decriminalized. And of course, you wouldn't be having things like, 98 proof moonshine being cooked. That people aren't always drinking 98 proof moonshine, or I guess it would be 200 proof moonshine, because that's not always in their that's not always within their realm of what their life can accept. So that is the same reason we wouldn't see people doing crystal meth and crocodile. They'd be doing a much more modified, tolerable variant of things like heroin and crystal meth. That, unfortunately, is something that would happen if these things were legalized. But yeah, it's important to say that even the private crime that exists in society, the vast majority is the cause of state intervention and black markets. I like that you mentioned blowback occurs when you start these feuds with other families. It's something that you might respect more about the mafia, that they get their own hands dirty instead of, just stealing from other people, claiming to protect them while creating other enemies that kill their civilians. At least there is some targeting between, the mafia leaders. I certainly wish presidents and prime ministers would focus on each other instead of always using civilians as pawns. I'd much rather them, shoot Saddam than, starve 500,000 Iraqis with sanctions in the 90s or any amount of.
But it was worth it.
What's going on in Yemen? Yes, that's right. According to United Nations ambassador on 60 Minutes, saying that that it was worth it. We have sanctions in the First World War, headed by Winston Churchill, Lord of the Admiralty. According to Martin Gilbert, pro-Churchill historian, killed about 600,000 innocent people. This is what happens when you have a political class that delegates responsibility. So instead of you, the guy doing it, are responsible for what happens, it's more we are the government, so whatever happens, we are partially responsible. We are the state. We shouldn't criticize them. That is the problem with democracy from monarchy. When you have a monarchy, or if you have a mafia, it's much easier to allocate blame. Hey, look at what you're doing. Look at the results you've yielded. But when you have this sort of we are the government ideology, the dumbest nonsense you could ever think of, some people have the right to coerce, others have the duty to obey, and they think these are the same group. dumbest nonsense I could ever imagine. But when you have something like when you're able to say, all right, this is a group and we're going to hold them responsible, they cannot get away with the large scale atrocities that governments get away with, because you simply don't see them as an extension of yourself. So yeah, those are my my main takeaways. I also liked the idea of private law. So this is one of the things that that really we assume only legislation or law in a society exists as a causal result of politicians coming together, using power that's been delegated to them by the people, writing words down on paper, voting on them, and using the police to implement them. That is a complete lie. I have 3 sources on this, and it's very difficult to summarize these ideas, but law is not the result of politicians writing words down on paper and voting. It's much more a general custom that exists within a given society based on the traditions, social customs, and popular opinion. So even if we have a law that says no jaywalking's allowed, if we legalized kidnapping, I don't believe that you would get a change in the mindset of the average person just because it literally said the words on paper, kidnapping allowed for the next 2 days. What you have when you have law is a reflection of societal norms based on popular opinion. Now, the idea is, well, without a state, there would be constant chaos. However, we can see that there was every incentive for parties to voluntarily, peacefully settle disputes. And sometimes, yes, there is violence. You know when else there's violence between groups? When there is a government and they have armies that are coercively funded that they end up blaming civilians for no matter what happens. That when they don't keep you safe, their revenues increase, like Bush after 9/11 having a 90% approval rating. So, of course, perverse incentives there. The point about law in society is law is not the result of one group writing down words. It is the result of custom and so a social honor system. What is good, what is bad, what should be punished, what shouldn't be. The best proof of this is the idea that you can just ask someone, how many laws have you read? I mean, certainly, wouldn't you have to have read all of the laws so you could follow them? I've read one law in my entire life in Arizona 5 years ago, and it never even passed. So it's not that we need the state to have laws or else there would be mafias. As I mentioned earlier, government's number one cause of the mafia. So the idea that we'd get constant violent disputes between organizations is also not the case, because, as Robert Murphy made the case, and even ANCAPs give the state too much credit, it's not that, well, there's not a government there to help us. It's that there is such risk because of a government that it incentivizes someone to use violence instead of peaceful negotiation or social exposure. I'm going to tweet out this person screwed me out of drug money or prostitution services that they promised me. So yeah, that is my general ideas on the movie and the ANCAP perspective.
All right, thank you for that, Keith. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for the show today, everyone. No, I'm just kidding. But I did have a joke like 10 minutes ago about imagining Clydesdale drive-by. Budweiser Clydesdale is going by like the Miller Lite plant or something, doing a drive-by in your analogy for alcohol prohibition. Yeah, there's a lot to what you're saying for sure. And I think the mafia and the government are almost synonymous, and it's very highlighted in this movie. And it's hard to make a distinction between them. They do make law for their own selves, and they do put on a face of honor and doing things for the greater good or for the good of the family. But then they'll immediately go against whatever they just said they were going to do and do whatever the hell they want to do, violent or not. So, Robert, I'll go to you with that transition.
Well, yeah, the mafia, as bad as they are the minor leagues of crime. They can never hope to reach the heights that government does. And like Keith pointed out, is due to the perceived legitimacy of government. We'd never put up with the mafia ruling over you. You know, generally speaking, the mafia, as bad as they are, kill each other not just like random civilians. They don't just like invade other countries. There is a high incentive in mafia life to keep the peace and to keep business and keep the money flowing. They are in it, to get rich and to fend for their families. And war does disrupt that. It eats into everybody's profits. It's messy. And like you said, they can't just socialize the violence. They actually have to physically get their hands dirty. Now, a guy like Michael Corleone, he's, it's figures on his bottom line. He still has to buy the soldiers to go and fight the war for him, so to speak. And in actual reality, it's pretty much exactly what they do. And he does, but he is directly paying for them. I mean, of course, it's with probably some stolen money, but it's also some legitimately acquired funds. I mean, he's not necessarily taxing some people, although there probably are protection rackets. I mean, especially at the street level, he's probably not, he's not denying funds that are coercibly obtained. He's fine taking that stuff. But ultimately, mafias, I would take 50 mafias for every government. As bad as they are, they're nothing. They are peanuts compared to the professional criminals.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of they each had their own turf, like there were the 5 families in New York, and so you were either in the Corleone group or the Titalia group or whatever, like you were in their area. And in Godfather 2, when we go back to Vito as a young man as De Niro, they have Finucci, who's this like pimped out dude going around extorting people for protection money. And in a way, it's sort of like, okay, that's kind of what they did at the Chaz, right? They went around and extorted businesses for protection money. So they were doing their mafia thing. And that's what you do with your property taxes when you pay your local governments for protection and fire services and things like that. I mean, the difference is very, very minor. It's just the scale, really. But I really liked the whole idea of them saying that they're in the same racket and that they use each other to get leverage over the other. So like Senator Aguirre at the beginning of Godfather Part 2 is trying to use this casino license as leverage to get a bunch of money beyond the amount that it would normally charge. Like it's a $20,000 license and he's trying to charge like $250,000. And I love Michael's response. He's like, you can have my answer now. You said you'd have till the next day to answer. And he's like, you can have my answer now if you'd like. I'll give you nothing. Fuck you. I'll give you nothing. And I'd be appreciative if you would waive the $20,000 fee it would normally be and just gift it to me. And it's like this like totally alpha move against Geary. And I don't know if that is because Michael had already conceived or was in a position to know that he would be able to get dirt on Geary. Because later on we see that he is in some brothel and ends up killing a girl.
Owned by Fredo.
Owned by Fredo. So it's like it's a
Total
setup, right? It's like a
setup.
salon getting your hair done with no mask. It's a setup.
It's totally that.
But he knew that he would then easily get leverage over Geary and get whatever he wants. He would own him at that point. So it was kind of nice to see that kind of interplay. I don't know if it was like conceived beforehand or he just knew, hey, everyone does something that we can get him on. And so we just have to like, not quite entrap him, but, just be there for when he fucks up or be there for a point where he gets too drunk to remember. And then we do something and just make him believe he did it. Because that's what it kind of felt like had happened.
I read that as, Michael knew exactly how he was going to get dirt on the guy. And he knew that he's probably going to philander around with whoever. And if he visits, a brothel, then that's a perfect time to drug him and to kill a prostitute and to blame it on the guy. That's how I read that situation.
Yeah, these are often referred to as honeypot traps. We have examples going back to the Israeli Mossad in the 60s with a spy named Eli Cohen. You can read a book about him called Our Man in Damascus. They sent this Jewish guy into Argentina to go to Syria to meet up with the top Syrian officials to have orgy parties to get dirt on them from the prostitutes that he hired, and he was being banked by the Israeli government. The other example is a guy named Craig Spence in Washington, D.C. This was called the Franklin cover-up, where you actually have these blackmail operations where you get a politician, where you get leverage on the politician with either getting them on camera or in such an unfavorable situation that they can't get out of. This way you have leverage. And the another example that's highly suspect is the Jeffrey Epstein example of him having a number of cameras throughout his Manhattan and residence in Palm Beach, Florida. This is according to both Marie Farmer and Virginia Roberts, who were both Epstein victims, where they had said he had cameras all throughout the house, taping people like Prince Andrew and taping people like Bill Clinton. We also have the Mossad planting spy devices on the house and the White House as late as September of 2019, according to a report in Politico. So this is what's known as the philosophy of leverage. It's just about having power so you can get people to do something they otherwise wouldn't do. You definitely saw that as a big theme throughout.
Right. Yeah. And I was about to mention the Epstein thing as being that kind of as an example in real life. And another movie that we did a while back, Robert, was El Royale, which was a similar kind of setup. It was, I think, in the 1960s, maybe. And it was like maybe, a few decades after The Godfather here, Lake Tahoe, divided line between Nevada and California. There were certain rules on one side of the hotel and certain rules on the other side. And they were having high profile guests come in, political people, political players, videotaping everything they were doing in those rooms to use those as leverage. So obviously getting them in compromising positions, either they're married and it's, adultery or underage or whatever, just anything they can use to get what they want out of that person while they're in that position of power. So yeah, it's a great example of that in this movie here. And it seemed like it was like the go-to play for Michael in this, because he didn't have that dirt yet, but he knew he could get it. So it was like that was the playbook. That was the call, the play to call.
Indeed. Now, Keith, in the plot of this film, did you find yourself really engaged? Or, I mean, you'd seen this film before, probably, no doubt. I mean, it's a classic, I'm sure, but I don't know. I found myself on rewatch to just not be super invested in the characters. I found other mafia films like Goodfellas or Casino, where you're actually led into these main characters, a little bit more engaging. I don't know. What did you feel from that angle?
Yeah, you know what? I just loved it. I would say 1 and 2 are just my favorite movies of all time because I love to see the process. This is the process of how this guy, has people coming to visit him round the clock, even at his daughter's wedding. So it's the process of how does a hit go out? A small hit of, hey, let's beat some people up. Well, you had some guy come to him and Corleone asks for his friendship. And the guy says, please, I'm in a vulnerable situation. Can I give you money? He says that's insulting, but I'll take care of you. This way they could cash out on the favor in the future with the funeral home. Just that process, I love seeing so much. The meeting with Sollozzo. Why should you take this risk? And just the thinking behind it. I just loved every bit of it. I mean, I think it's like 6.5 hours between the two movies. I loved every second of it. And the characters, I just think that they complement each other so well. You have like this hothead Sonny, and the amazing thing with all mafia movies is that they get you to really sympathize with someone is involved in dishonorable behavior, whether it's criminality, totally unjustified things. You have things that fall off the truck, total violation of property rights and unjust. So You have that, but you still have the sympathetic side for some of these characters that totally do dangerous things, and even having kids that you put in harm's way, that is completely unjustified. So yeah, it is amazing how they get you to sympathize and still like the people who are the bad guys. I think they mostly do it with having ideas that you have for your own life, being a family man, having a family, valuing family and friendship, that they get you to be attracted with those, and then attach criminality to the things that you really like in others. Much how marketers will have people in very good shape being happy on the beach with a Bud Light. Well, they want you to associate the good, happy, fun, fulfilling life with their product in order to get the audience to really sympathize with people who we see as criminals. They really humanize them in a certain way that I just loved.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to that, and a lot of the prior like mafia movies to this were more focused on the criminality and the badassery of it. And I think that Coppola's approach was to make this more of a family, not like made for families, but like the family unit was the key to the movie, like the relationships and the interplay. And the mafia stuff was just sort of like additional, it's just for like embellishment or almost. In a way. So it's really a relationship story, and it's a story of passing the torch from Brando's character to Michael's character, with Sonny kind of in between. And and of course we're talking about both of the movies here, but he even mentions, after Sonny gets shot, they massacred my boy. He almost makes light of, Sonny wasn't a very good Don. I loved him, but he wasn't cut out for this. He was too much of a hothead. He was not made for being honorable or negotiating or being tactful with plans and trying to get like the long game going. He was more of just immediate reaction or going to war. And that's another thing they talked about, was how costly it was to go to war. In the original Godfather, we were talking about how everyone wanted to avoid a war because it's going to be so much resources expended and risk to their operations and their very lives. To see that be called out is really good, because like you were saying earlier, Keith, it sure would be nice if politicians would be the ones actually to take up arms against the other politicians on the opposing of a conflict, rather than just getting people ginned up with propaganda and patriotism to go out and kill somebody who they're probably more alike the person they're fighting on the battlefield than the person who sent them there to go and kill this person on the battlefield.
Indeed. Now you guys bring up family, and this movie is definitely all about family, and this whole series is. But as a father, Daniel, from a scale of Will Smith in Pursuit of Happiness, terrible, to Robin Williams in Mrs. Doubtfire, fantastic, where do you rate Michael Corleone on a scale of fathers? Because to me, he pays lip service. I'm sure he loves his children. Of course he does. But like we were saying earlier, he's really just wanting to do what he wants to do, and hopes that he can have his cake and eat it too, with keeping the family together and keeping Kay and his kids. And he's going to use his power and his influence to get what he wants. At the same time, he's putting everybody at risk for physical violence. To me, he's a shithouse father. Now, what do you say?
It's hard to disagree with you. I think that he cares about his family very much, and he wants to make sure that he's taking care of them from a financial perspective. And of course, he would want to keep them safe. Of course, there's inherent risks with what he's doing, and he's actually bringing risk and potential harm upon them more so than most other occupations might. I think that also Michael's sort of conflicted in that he had this taking of the mantle from Vito, and he doesn't have a son he can pass the reins to downstream. Like, that's why the situation with Kay was so impactful for him, because the first son that was born, I think his name's Anthony, he's got some issues. I don't know if they really get into it, but he is not progressing, like developing as a child would develop into a fully functional adult. Like we see some troubling signs in this movie that I think Michael was aware of. So that's why the K thing really hit him really hard. But I also think that, yeah, he was more focused on almost like being the best no matter the cost. Or I'm not sure how to say this right, but I've been watching the Last Dance, the Michael Jordan thing recently, about his winning the 6 championships and the 98 season, his last season, where they won the 6th one, where he was so driven, relentlessly driven to be better than anyone who competed with him, just to the point of embarrassment. And he would take any slight or perceived slight, or even just manufactured, created in his head, to use that as the motivation to go and be to the point where he would eviscerate the competition. And I feel like Michael had, like in the movie Corleone, had a similar kind of drive. Like he wanted to be the top alpha no matter what. So he might have paid lip service and really did care about his family, but he didn't know how to like tangibly make that, other than providing for them financially.
Right. Yeah. From my perspective, he's like any top level CEO. You have to put in so much effort and so much energy to maintain that level. He was on top for so long that you're gonna suffer. Your home life is gonna suffer. You're not able to, spend the time with the family that your average person would otherwise be able to. Just kind of like the argument about why there aren't so many, female CEOs and that sort of thing. There just aren't that many women that are willing to put in so much time and effort and energy to get to the top. It takes a whole lot of effort to not only get to the top, but then to maintain your place at the top. And I imagine it's a lot of stress being the Don Corleone or anybody at the top of a giant corporation like that for so long. Eventually you do want to just retire and get the fuck out, because that is just a pile of stress. You're constantly thinking about all these people you're pissing off, all these people you're robbing, you're grifting. How many bullets you think have your name on them are out there at any given time? And then also of your family, I imagine as a father, all you do is worry about your kids. Well, how much does a Don Corleone worry about his kids? I imagine it's really, really bad. So
yeah. And he's on all the time, like constantly on, like there's no off time other than when he's sleeping, really.
And to think how many times he analyzes each conversation, with another mafioso type. You're constantly reading subtext and reading them, what they really mean. And he's like the master of it, right? Like who knows what he's actually means, what he says and that kind of thing. But I imagine for him, it's got to be exhausting just going to like any kind of function.
Yeah. Now I'd be remiss not to bring up the whole Fredo and the
CNN anchor?
The CNN anchor, because that's, of course, it became like a big thing last year, how the Cuomos, the governor is Mario Cuomo, right? And the CNN anchor, who's kind of a moron, is Chris Cuomo. And people made fun of him by referring to him as Fredo, and it pissed him off to no end, because Fredo is sort of this weak, well-meaning but naive guy who's the oldest or the eldest surviving son, right? Sonny was the oldest, Sonny, and then it was Fredo, and then Michael. And so Fredo felt stepped over, but he was also not capable of really filling this role. And so that's kind of, you got Mario Cuomo, who's got like, or was Mario the dad?
Mario was the dad.
Andrew's the current governor.
Chris is the anchor. Andrew is the current governor.
Right. Yeah. And
I
so
loved how he called
it.
I called Fredo was a racial slur against him. That was my favorite thing he said.
Oh yeah. Well, someone called it to his face that that was real funny. And it's just funny how he stokes racial division constantly on his show, unprincipled, 42 minutes, 5 nights a week, and adds nothing of intellectual value to society. And for something like Fredo to piss him off, it's just so classic of where the most powerful people in a society where the state controls education can watch that idiot and think that they're getting news. And he explicitly says, make sure you only get WikiLeaks information from the media, because it's illegal to obtain these stolen documents. For the media, it's different. That's his argument. It's different.
Yeah, it's different for them.
Mass murder when the state does it, it's different. Nope. There we go. Thanks. I appreciate the in-depth analysis and clarification.
It's like a magic wand. It's different.
Exactly. Yeah, this is the null zone, as some philosophers call it, where you just don't have any principles with regard to a certain realm of society.
Now, speaking of Fredo, though, in terms of the film, what do you guys think of Michael killing him? Like, Fredo was involved in this plot to kill Michael, but he claims he didn't know that it was going to be a hit, but he knew he was cavorting and kind of providing information for Michael's potential enemies. Maybe, who knows? He's kind of like this moron who is like a useful idiot for them, and then Michael turns around and has him executed. I don't know how I feel about it, but I'm wondering if either of you guys like can forcefully condemn him for it, or like totally give him a pass. I don't know.
So toward the end of part 2, especially when Michael and Tom Hagen are, having a conversation, Robert Duvall is just shocked, like, Mike, you're just going on a rampage. You need to settle down a little bit. You definitely see how he goes from let's kill people if we have to hey, look at this fancy tool we can use whenever we want. I will say, I think Fredo was a justified killing just because, anyone who subjects you to so much risk is certainly what you would call a co-conspirator to aggression or violence. So, the idea of he probably was that stupid that he could give Michael's information to, a competing Don, and, they wouldn't really use it for anything bad. You've got to be such a moron. Even in that case, I think, I would think killing that person who subjected you to so much risk. And you have to be able to see that people who kill other people and who are in competition with you, when you give them vulnerable information, they're going to use it. They wouldn't have said, hey, we want to kill your brother. Where does he live? You need to be able to see past that. So I think that was a justified one.
Wow.
I definitely see why from Michael's perspective in making the family stronger, why it made sense, because Fredo definitely was a liability. But I think that was Michael's drive to be the best and to stay on top and that kind of thing. But I think Daniel's got some opinions here.
Yeah, I think that he should have given Fredo the K treatment, the excommunicado. Like, hey, you're out of any family business or operations. What's that?
He did. He said, "You're no longer my brother." Remember? I don't want to see you.
Yeah. But killing him, I think, was a bit far. I think that he should have been out and on his own, no longer on the property, that kind of thing. I think that would have been more of
going to cut him off, knives out style.
But then you have a resentful employee, ex-employee looking for somewhere to work. Where's he going to go? Well, Hyman Roth, he's got a good relationship with. So, that is just such a line. I thought, the Fredo killing, I'm reluctantly would support, just because, if you play Russian roulette with someone, against their will, you deserve what's coming. The other killing I thought was so justified was Carlo. I think they let Carlo live too long in part 1. Was that his name? The guy who married their sister?
The sister, the guy that was beaten, and then they set up Sonny.
That was a totally justified killing as well, I thought. Did you think that one was justified, Dan?
Oh, Daniel. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I assume Robert.
No, we're grilling Daniel right now. It's
Yeah,
totally good.
Robert's
if you
okay.
entertain Fredo's death, you're going to be okay with Carlos. So I'm curious what Dan wants to say.
I got no problems killing Carlo, by the way. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah. Carlo's a piece of shit, and if he used instigating a fight with what's her name?
Beating the shit out of his sister. Yeah.
Connie, right? Connie?
Yeah.
Beating the shit out of the sister just so that it'll incite Sonny to rush over there to try to kill him, and then they're going to be waiting from the toll booth. Yeah, that is basically you are an accessory to the murder of Sonny, right? You've baited him into this trap. Not only that, but you've also violently assaulted an innocent person in order to get that plan in motion. So, yeah, I think if it's street rules, mafia rules here, yeah, I think he's got to go.
All right.
Yeah. So I'm bringing up, street rules, mafia stuff.
Street rules.
Yeah.
What do you think of Sonny beating the shit out of him in the street?
Loved it.
Yeah, I would have kicked him a little bit harder, probably.
I mean, when the reason I'm such a sexist when it comes to men hitting women is simply just because the vast majority, unless it's me hitting Ronda Rousey, okay, well she's going to be okay. When you have someone just physically so much more powerful than someone else and they really lose it, you deserve to either die or just get hurt so profoundly that you could never do that again. So yeah, I totally justify Sonny's initial action.
I really liked his air punch.
The air punch was bad. The director picked the wrong angle. He wasn't even close.
It was like watching Adam West and Batman in that one. Pow, ping, boom, pow. That almost ruined it. But I was just so hyped to see that. Probably just because I fantasize doing that to the inconveniencers in my everyday life. That seeing someone else take up the mantle was pretty nice. I mean, you see these things all the time in court cases where you have some evil scumbag who you're just like, oh my god, life in prison is not going to do this guy justice, and we're going to be paying for him if he's in maximum security for the next 60 years. So that's another thing about these mafia movies, where it's not you telling the officer to go enact or enforce the law. It's you making the decision, taking things into your own hands and taking the risk, and you feeling so justified that you do it yourself. I mean, Sonny was essentially the Don. You have, because the Don was pretty much in a coma, you have Don Corleone as Robert De Niro doing his own dirty work. You don't you get it with Michael, of course, when he kills Sollozzo, and the police officer who gave the stand down order to the Don security guards, which is that's another theme. When you have an active conspiracy to not protect people or property, like we have with police in these riots that as of today have been going on for about 3 months. When you have active stand down orders, it is the most blatant example of why you need a voluntarily funded defense force or any sort of security force in society. You have to be able to say, you guys suck, you did a terrible job. So of course you're never going to get a perfect anything, let alone security force. But for the same reason, you have to be able to say, all right, Eric Garner's family doesn't have to pay the cops anymore if they don't want to. Nicole Brown Simpson's family should not have to pay the cops. When you have, such corrupt people in the police, or who just are terrible at protecting people and their property, you have to be able to opt out of funding them. So to just see that, I don't know if he was the commissioner, but it was that cop who, beats up Michael in part 1, because he was, planning the killing of the Don. He told people to stand down, and Michael basically saved his dad's life and then later killed them in the restaurant. So that is another angle I saw in this.
Right. Yeah. And that was like really the transformational portion of Michael in the first movie, where he's this like sweet, innocent guy up until that point where he saves his father, and he sort of like realizes, it dawns on him, like he's the guy who has to not only protect his father, but then take the reins from his father, and then seeking that revenge against Sollozzo and the muscle, the cop muscle in that restaurant. And that's where he becomes the new Don. Like that is his transformation's complete at that point. And we get the Michael Corleone that we see throughout Godfather Part 2.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. He had made his decision. There's no going back once he kills those two people in the restaurant, and he's going to do it for the family. So
right now, we are about an hour into our episode here, and I feel like I have a bunch more stuff that I'd like to talk about. So may I propose we come to a parlay here, and we do a second episode on the trilogy in the near future?
Absolutely. Yeah, that works.
yeah, I suppose you could probably twist my arm and make me come back.
Make you come back? Okay, make you come back. Because, but I will leave with one final point I want to make, and then we can get into. Do we even want to do a summary and review, or just kind of wind it down and come back? Let's do that.
Wind it down and then come back. Yeah.
All right. So just because it's like current events, when Kay reveals to Michael the abortion and whatever, he puts her on, or is it before this? No, it's before that. Yeah, it's before the abortion thing. He puts Kay on lockdown, house arrest, which seems very similar to what we're all experiencing right now with the pandemic. And she like tries to leave, just like go get groceries or whatever. And the armed security folks stop her. They're like, no, we can get you anything you need. Tom Hagen comes out and is like, anything you need, we can get it for you. You don't need to go anywhere. And she's a prisoner in this palatial compound, lakefront, fancy house, bunch of, property, etc. And we have millions and millions and millions of people all over the world right now, locked down into wherever they happen to live at the time. Right? Like some people might be in these tiny little apartments, no yard, no nothing. I'm thinking of people like in Australia who are seemingly experiencing this totalitarian nightmare of wrongthink and wrong social media posting will get you arrested. We were talking about this a lot in the pre-show, which is available for Patreon supporters, by the way, everyone. lastnighters.com/Patreon. We talked with Keith for about an hour, and we touched on this a little bit. But that was just one thing that I saw in Godfather 2 that I'm like, whoa, hey, that's happening right now. I can't believe that they put this in a movie in 1974, and they're just so prescient that it's going to become relevant so much time later. Robert, your thoughts on that?
No, you're absolutely right. She got put on house arrest, and she had a very negative response, as I would suppose everyone would.
It's for her protection.
For her own protection, a prisoner in her own home. And she, that really plays psychological games with you. It's not just there's no cost to that. Like, yes, you're going to protect them, but at what cost? There is a cost. Now, I did appreciate that Michael's Reno home, which is surrounded by armed guards, is also protected by ADT. I really enjoyed that. It's like, in case anybody gets past the army of guys with machine guns, watch out for ADT. They're going to come and get you. So that was cute.
All right. Keith, any points you want to make or before we wind down and get into some Kathleen Turner Overdrive, which is the bonus content also available for Patreon supporters?
Yeah, my basic takeaway, I think really the anarcho-capitalist angle is the idea is that if we don't have a monopoly state, what we will have is competitors of violence. That is not the case at all. To the contrary, as I mentioned earlier, mafias, gangs are the result of state interaction. of states violently stopping what would otherwise be voluntary, mutually beneficial actions. Now, if we had just said, get rid of the government without changing the minds of the masses, yes, you would have nothing but warlords and civil wars, because you still have the belief in authority that is in the heads of the average person. The goal is not to privatize the White House and kick out the president. The president has no more power than me putting a little crown on my head, writing down words saying, this is an executive order everyone must follow. For the same reason, you should just hold whatever standards you have for me should apply to you and a group called Walmart and Amazon and Monster and Congress and the president. So it's not, the big takeaway for me is that the state is not the source of societal order and cooperation. To the contrary, it's the number one cause of conflict, because either you get your way and you enforce it on me, or I get my way and I enforce it on you. So much like there's a separation of church and state and you don't have religious wars, once you have separation of economy and state, you won't have the economic wars that we currently experience, not even close to the Iraq war scale, World War I, World War II, Vietnam scale, Franco-Prussian War. You would not have these. Government's the number one cause of conflict, violence, and lack of civilization. The market is the solution for this. To just put a finer point on what I was saying earlier, the fact that we have not read any of the legislation that Congress passes, yet we're still able to make tens of thousands of trades every year, we're still able to live our lives in relative peace, is a reflection that words being written down on paper by lying politicians is not the source of civilization. Books I would recommend on this are actually both by Edward Stringham. One is called Private Governance, and the other is called Anarchy in the Law. Private Governance is actually written by him and produced by Oxford. So we have a really good, we have a very credentialed book written by an anarcho-capitalist. And Anarchy in the Law is actually a collection of essays going back to Gustave de Molinari on the private production of security. He says, for the same reason a monopoly is bad for microphones, and monopoly is bad for security protection, lawmaking, and things that the state provides. Oh, also Chaos Theory by Bob Murphy is excellent. It's 2 short essays. That one you can get and read in probably an hour and a half, free PDF on Mises.org. So thank you, gentlemen, for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, very much appreciate having you on. And I think that I'm going to rename this episode our episode Godfather Part 1. Not that it's about the Part 1 movie, but this is Part 1 of our discussion. And I'd love to have you back in a couple of weeks to discuss it further. And we get more into the movie craft portion as well, where we actually give a review for Coppola's work here. I think it's well done for sure. And it's a lot of people consider it a masterpiece, both of these films, actually. And so, Robert, next week, we're going to go from masterpieces or near masterpieces to pieces of something else. We're going to have a less serious turn and do a movie that's barely a movie in Gentlemen Broncos, which was a suggestion by our guest next week, who goes by the name Ben Dirty J. Johnson. So this should be an irreverent discussion next week with Ben, talking about the Jared Hess movie, Gentlemen Broncos, which has one of the guys from the Flight of the Conchords. Hess, of course, made Nacho Libre and most famously Napoleon Dynamite. So it's going to be back in my wheelhouse of a 90-minute random comedy where I can just squeeze blood out of the turnip for something to talk about for a show.
Yeah, I remember seeing that film many years ago. I remember it mostly hinges on some intellectual property theft, where there's the main character is like this novelist who writes these weird ass sci-fi novels, and then the Flight of the Conchords guy, I should know his name. He's a famous guy, but yeah, he's in that, and he's a famous author in the film, but he's like running out of ideas. And yeah, he appropriates the main character's work. And then the final turn, Oh wait, I shouldn't say this. Okay, never mind. I won't talk about the final turn of the film.
Well, we are spoilers all the time, but I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, you haven't seen it yet, but it is something that you will appreciate, and it'll be a good discussion point because the world is saved by. You'll see.
Intellectual property.
Pretty much.
And it's Jermaine Clement, right?
That's it. That's the guy. Yeah.
Right. And I think we're going to be doing an episode with, we mentioned Pat McFarlane of Liberty Weekly earlier. I think he's going to come on for another Jermaine Clement film. What We Do in the Shadows sometime in October.
What is there to talk about in that film? It's a bunch of vampires hanging out and talking.
It's Halloween, man. It's going to be Halloween. It's weird how it seems like summer is over. It's Labor Day weekend right now, and it just feels like things have changed already, and we're already like the girls have already picked out their costumes. Like we're gearing up for Halloween already.
All right, let's get freaky.
Let's get freaky. All right. Well, Keith, thanks again for being our guest. People can find you on YouTube. And there's other locations that you mentioned. We'll have links galore on our show notes page at lastnighters.com/140. I hope you can stick around for a bit longer and do some more bonus content with us. And I want to have you back probably 3 or 4 weeks and pick up our discussion on Godfather Trilogy from there.
Absolutely, gentlemen. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well,
Always
thank you, guys. And we'll say good night from last night, everyone. See you next week. Peace out. Hi there, everyone. This is Daniel Elwood of the Actual Anarchy podcast, and we're going to be picking Godfather up again in a couple of weeks. So I usually try to save a question related to the film for this portion of the show. But since we haven't actually gotten to that point yet, and we're already an hour and some odd minutes into this conversation so far, I'm just going to wind this down here and just say thank you guys very much for being our listeners. We really appreciate it. Do give us subscribes on the old YouTube and on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, etc. If you can hit us up and leave us a review, that's really helpful. And if you like any of our pre-show or bonus content, go to actualanarchy.com/Patreon, and you can support us at any level. And we'll just throw a bunch of extra posts and access your way, like live stream access where we're recording right now. There's a private Facebook group where people can watch this stuff. We also send the links out via Patreon, so do check that out. And if you want to continue on our discussion with Godfather, check it out again in a couple of weeks. And next week we'll be doing Gentlemen Broncos. So you can find the show notes and more for this particular episode on The Godfather, but we'll call part 1 of our discussion at actualanarchy.com/197. And appreciate you guys very much. And we'll say maximum freedom, everyone. Peace out.
The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day. Do 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 do.